This is SoundNotion, the weekly podcast for new music and music news. I'm Dave McDonald, and this week I am joined not by Patrick Gulo, not by Sam Merciers, and not by Nate Blyton. So you should still tune in, though, because I have two awesome guests with me. First of all, you know him, you love him from the now defunct podcast Music is Hard. Saxophonist and wannabe composer Tim Rosenberg is with us. Thank you. Tim joined us at the very last minute. So I thank you very much for agreeing to do this when I called you literally 14 hours ago.
My pleasure.
And also joining us is composer, part-time computer scientist, and wannabe saxophonist, Ben Fuhrman. Thanks, Ben, for being with us.
Great to be here, Dave.
This is a reunion of sorts because the three of us all went to graduate school together. And I haven't talked to Ben in a very long time. I see Tim every day, but I haven't talked to Ben in a very long time. So it's nice to catch up with old friends. Ben, can you give us, for people that have never heard your music before and that aren't completely oblivious to the world of new music, how would you describe your stuff?
Well, it's pretty far out there for the most part.
Well, can you be more specific?
Well, what I like to do is to work with live performers and computers so that you have a computer part that is reacting to the performers, editing their sound in real time, and spitting it out in increasingly more interesting ways.
So you'd say that most of your music is electronic music, and most of that electronic music is interactive with a computer that's actually reacting?
I'd say it's about 60-40 interactive versus pre-recorded.
Okay. So what do you think then is the difference? Why? So I from my experience, having written just a tiny fraction of electronic music, the interactive stuff is a lot harder to do. It takes a lot more time. And I'm curious as to why you take the time to do that. Why is it better to make a piece interactive as opposed to a pre-recorded kind of what we used to call performer and tape? Mm-hmm. I guess some people still call it that. Yeah,
you still see performance and tape or performance and CD pieces programmed on a lot of festivals. I found when I was writing my dissertation, I was commissioned by the H2 Quartet to write a piece for saxophone quartet and either live electronics or tape. And I found that writing for tape and trying to sync that up with 4 other musicians was just going to be incredibly difficult. That the parts, as I was writing them, kept getting more and more complex. There was just layer upon layer of polyrhythm, and it would have been an absolute nightmare to sync it up with a tape that had a specific time signature and BPM set. So we started experimenting with different ways to do this, and we found that by cutting up the tape into sections, we could create a computer part that could be performed by triggering it from one of the sax players. And that just kind of started me down the road of really playing around with interactive electronics and using things like pitch or volume thresholds to trigger events on the computer that then process and react to what the live performer is doing.
Okay. So do you think then that the music is different, or do you think that it's just a process thing?
It's partly both. The music is different because there's always the element of spontaneity that the performer has. They can be more rubato. They can, in some cases, improvise different sections, and the computer will react to those in different ways.
Yeah, I think that's kind of one of the big knocks on tape music is that it's predetermined, that the performer doesn't get to add as much to the performance as they normally would. They don't get as much input, and it's in that way a little bit less collaborative.
I don't know about that.
No?
I think in the tape pieces that I've played, like I have a lot of freedom. The only thing I don't have freedom over is the tempo.
Time. Yeah.
Right.
So, I mean, and that's really no different than a lot of pieces where you play, almost strictly in time with some sort of audible or inaudible metronome. So it's really not that different. And I've certainly had the ability to shape pieces with pre-recorded sound in the way that I think are important to me.
Okay. All right. Well,
sorry, sorry to fact check you.
I sit corrected. Sorry, Ben, you were gonna continue on with your response earlier.
Yeah, I was going to say that the process of composition is also drastically different when you're writing a piece for an interactive electronic setup as opposed to writing for tape.
How so?
Well, when I write for tape, I usually start by composing the instrumental part or large sections of the instrumental part, and then opening up Pro Tools, having the performer play it in, and then working around with the sounds there to create the tape part.
Yeah.
And from there, I can then open up Photoshop and Finale and create a graphical realization or a notational realization that shows what's happening in the tape part. But then that tape is essentially the performance for every subsequent time the piece is played. They're kind of bound to whatever the initial performer was doing on that tape, how I reacted to that, how they react to feedback from hearing the tape, and if we re-record certain portions. But when I'm working with live electronics, it's a lot more conceptual. So I will work on writing the instrumental part, and I'll jot down things on the score, like add a flanger here, or use a Fourier transform and cut out bands 1 through 70, assuming a 256 band. And then with that, I can set cues in the performer's part so that they will advance the computer, and that it will always happen at that section. That by playing a high C sharp at approximately 2 minutes to 2:30 into the piece, then the flanger and the Fourier transform will always be applied to the part.
Okay, so when you say that, it sounds relatively deterministic in the reactions to the player. And we've talked in the past on the show about kind of a couple of different types of interactive electronics. There's the kind of interaction that you talked about with your piece for saxophone quartet and electronics, where the recorded part is kind of just a tape that's designed to follow the performer, and then there's the interactive electronics that are taking parts of the performance itself in some form or another, and transforming live samples, or that somehow make their own decisions through some kind of decision-making program to make each performance a little bit different in more substantive ways than you would in a lot of other kinds of music. Have you written a lot of music that does that second part that is almost in some ways people talk about that second one as though the computer is improvising, which I think is a little bit false, but it's, I think, a little bit like improvising with the composer, because these rules are set up by the composer. Do you do stuff like the other one? And if so, how does that relate to the other kinds of music that you write?
I do some stuff like that. Power Cycle, for example, has...
Power Cycle, by the way, the piece we're going to listen to at the end of the show. Sorry.
Yes.
Go ahead.
That has a lot of randomized variables in the computer part.
Okay.
So if the cajon hits a certain volume threshold, then it triggers the computer to react to that. But the computer has any number of possible ways it can react. I think we factored it out one time, and for every potential reaction that it can take, the computer has about 34 or 35 different potential actions that it can use.
Wow. So that will multiply up pretty quick to be, thousands of different performance possibilities.
Right. But at the same
cool.
time, it's also somewhat deterministic because the performer uses either a second performer at a laptop or they use a foot pedal to change what samples are being re-triggered in the computer part based on their position in the score.
Right.
And also to change things like how much overdrive is applied, if the spectral filter is being turned on or off, or any other number of variables that we had set and kind of predetermined were effects that we wanted to use in the computer.
And how much freedom does the performer have then to react to those quote unquote improvisations, those random events from the computer?
In the case of Power Cycle, they don't have a lot of freedom, but they can adjust things like volume and accents. The way that Power Cycle kind of functions is that it's playing the cajon as if it were a synthesizer with a whole lot of random variables in the computer part.
That's very interesting. Tim, do you have any? You were making a face there for a little bit.
Oh, that's just my face.
No. I was gonna say another thing that comes up a lot when I want to talk about theory, Ben. I want to talk about theory and about philosophy because
this is gonna be the best show.
Because because it's been a long time since anybody's quoted Adorno on SoundNotion, and I know that Ben just has Adorno on his nightstand right now, and
yes.
Wait, are you serious? Do you actually have Adorno on? Because you said that in a way that I could totally believe.
No.
Okay.
No. My Kindle is on my nightstand right now, but it does not have aesthetics and modernism loaded onto it.
So, just to be
what
clear,
a shame.
I know. That's like free Ambien. You're really missing out here, and I think that's probably cheaper than prescription medication.
Definitely.
They should, in fact, sell that as the generic while Ambien is still under patent. But my point is, I've talked to you a lot about your music over the years, and I've read the things that you've written about your music. I've read your program notes and your blog before. And one thing that has come up several times is this. You describe sounds as being real, and the other side of that is unreal sounds. So can you just explain? I've asked you this before. Can you just explain what you mean by real and unreal sounds, and maybe give some examples?
Yeah,
it's not like I'm writing an essay question live on air. What is meant by Ben Fuhrman when he writes real and unreal sounds? Give examples, show your work.
Sounds like he's trying to pass his like oral exam.
I know, that's what this is essentially.
So tough.
This is Sunday morning oral exams with the SoundNotion folk.
All right. Have at it, Ben.
As I remember it, this did not actually come up in my oral exams.
Despite the fact that you wrote about it in your dissertation.
I did, yeah.
You have a very well-prepared committee.
Right. Well, when I say real sounds, what I'm talking about is any sound that can be recognized for the source that created it. So a violin is a real sound. My dog barking when the neighbor's dog is outside is a real sound. Anything that sounds like a classic Moog off of Wendy Carlos's albums is a real sound.
Okay, so I'm going to stop you there because you could recognize that thing that sounds like a Wendy Carlos Moog sound, but I don't think I could. So you have defined, this is interesting to me, is that you have defined real sounds based not on your intent, but on the audience's perception. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay.
And that's because when I'm composing, if I'm working on a piece in Ableton or Pro Tools, I have the benefit of knowing what all of the sound sources are. I can look at my track list and say, okay, this was a person walking on gravel that was recorded at this location at this time of day.
Okay, so you're cheating.
I'm cheating, yes, because I know what everything is.
Okay. Well, you know what everything is. And then, so what's an unreal sound?
An unreal sound is something that the listener cannot readily identify the source for.
And when you say source, you mean when you're talking about recorded sounds, you're talking about the thing that originally made it. Because I would imagine that there is another layer of realness and unrealness in a piece for a live performer and electronics, where there are going to be times, say in a piece for saxophone quartet and electronics, where the electronics sound like saxophone.
Oh yeah.
And where does your real and unreal paradigm sit in that context?
In that context, my personal paradigm is that if it is extremely unlikely that this sound would ever exist outside of electronically produced fashion, then it would be qualified as unreal.
Okay. Now here's the Dave McDonald question. We've talked about the theory and the philosophy of all this stuff, but I want to know how this affects the music that you're writing. Like, when I listen to this music and I hear sounds, is what I would like to think about these things and have it not just be a kind of sonic scavenger hunt, like, and pick out and label each thing. How does this guide the composition when you're writing the music and you pull together this collection of real and unreal sounds? How do you demonstrate these principles in the music?
When I'm writing, I'm usually trying to look for the best balance between something that is real and something that is unreal to the listener.
Okay.
I'm really pretty heavily influenced by a lot of surrealism, and I really like the idea of taking...
Boy, did you come to the right show.
Yeah, I know. I'm really influenced by that, and taking existing ideas and taking them to illogical extremes, or taking them and warping them so far out of perception that they become something new entirely and can be developed as an independent idea.
So is that the thing then? You are concerned with maybe blurring the line between the real and the unreal sounds?
When I'm composing, my goal is that the piece will in fact blur those lines, that what is real at one point will become processed and edited on the computer and end up becoming unreal. That you can see the performer playing, say, a violin, but what you're hearing is something that you would never suspect could ever come from a violin.
That's very interesting, and I think that's particularly interesting with regard to the live sampling thing that I mentioned earlier, and that you mentioned happens in some of your pieces, where we actually hear the performer make the sound, and it is as real as it is going to get to us, that we are hearing it acoustically from the thing that originally created it, and sometimes maybe at the exact same time hearing something that sounds so unlike the instrument that originally created it that it's hard to consider them as the same thing. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
I think, just back to the point on surrealism for a second, that I think a surrealist, like Ben's describing here, would try to be in that gray area between real and unreal, and you know, in that center spot as much as possible to try to kind of make things seem possible and seem plausible in that context, but strange in some way that keeps the listener guessing at what's going on and what's real, right? Do you agree, Ben?
Oh, I do. But at times, I also will stray from the center towards more real or towards more unreal, just to toy with expectations and to set up the listener for a resolution or for a twist to the resolution.
Yeah, exactly. I could totally see that.
So Ben, I was saying you came to the right show because of course Tim, as some of you may or may not know, is our resident surrealism scholar. Tim doesn't like when I call him a scholar of surrealism, which
generous,
is
but I appreciate
which is
it.
exactly why I do it. So Ben, another completely, well, maybe it's not completely unrelated. I think of it as completely unrelated. You can feel free to set me straight. Aspect of your musical career, you're a performer. You play the violin and the mandolin mostly, and I would think that these days you're playing a lot more mandolin than anything else, because you play in one of the most interesting ensembles that I can think of. Tell the good people at home about Wissal.
Well, Wissal is kind of hard to define. We're kind of going with Arabic jazz fusion right now.
Okay.
And what it is it's a sextet of performers, and we play a mixture of original tunes and classical Arabic repertoire, which features a lot of improvisation on everyone's part.
What do you mean by classical Arabic repertoire, for those that are not familiar with the tradition?
I'm gonna probably screw this up and condense quite a bit of stuff.
That's okay. If we can joke and call Tim a surrealism scholar, we can joke and call you and me ethnomusicology scholars.
There we go.
Okay, Michael Largy is not watching this, I hope. Yeah, in Arabic music, you have a real focus on everyone playing the melody in unison at the same time, other than the percussion parts. And you have this very homophonic sound, but it becomes very different because everyone is interpreting the melody in different ways simultaneously. So where Igor, our oud player, is playing the melody, he might start adding tremolos and flourishes, and I might be playing that exact same melody at the same time and start to do things like bend the pitch, or maybe take it up an octave, or take it into a different timbre by playing it all on one string. And then, great photo.
There's the oud. If you're watching the video and you don't know what we're talking about when we say oud, it's the kind of pear-shaped lute on the right.
Yeah, that's actually the ancestor of the lute, and thus the modern guitar and the mandolin.
Indeed.
So I like to say that I'm the perfection of that instrumental family.
Sure. I like to say that saxophone's the perfection of the clarinet family, so it's all good.
Since some of the Wissal members may be watching, I'm going to take the opportunity to plead the fifth on that. But
Igor is also a saxophonist.
Yes,
he is.
Yes, but there's a clarinet in the ensemble.
There is a clarinetist.
Yes, of course.
So you not only do you perform this classical Arabic repertoire, which, as you say, is in this really interesting, well, seemingly interesting to us in the West, homophonic texture, which is almost completely unused in Western music, but is by far the dominant texture in every other kind of music in the world. You perform with them. You also write music for them. And I'm curious if you make any connections between the music that you write, like Power Cycle that we're listening to later, and the kinds of music that you write for Wissal.
Definitely.
Really? I would not have guessed that.
In Arabic music, there's a real focus on what they call the ikah, which is rhythmic modes that are used throughout a piece. And those rhythmic modes are generally anywhere from a 2/4 or a 2/8 up through something ridiculous like 10/4, 15/4, 31/4. And they all have different patterns of what they call the doom and the tak. The doom is the low hit, and the tak is the higher hit on the rick, which is the tambourine, or on a frame drum, or on a goblet drum, or whatever other percussion instrument you're playing. And after I started playing more and more with Wissal, started incorporating a lot of those rhythmic ideas into my pieces.
Interesting.
I had already been experimenting a little bit with different rhythmic ideas. And
so the influence went the other way. You started playing with Whistle, and then you started pulling stuff from Whistle into your music instead of doing this thing that you've been doing for so much longer, bringing that to Whistle.
Oh, I bring that to Whistle as well.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I got ahead of you there.
Yep. Yeah, when I'm writing for Whistle, it's very different from when I'm writing for electronics or for a solo performer, mostly because I have an entire ensemble to deal with, and I have to think, how am I going to express this idea to the bass player through chord symbols, or how am I going to set up this improv section so that it has an interesting harmonic background that a soloist can really jam over.
Okay. That's very interesting. I want to play a little bit. You guys have a CD coming out soon, and this is not the pick of the week, but it's cool, and so I want to listen to some of it. This is a piece that you wrote for this album. Does this album have a name?
The album's name is The Warp and the Weft.
Okay.
Which are the different parts that come together when you're weaving a tapestry.
Okay. Interesting. All right. So this is from Whistle's CD, The Warp and the Weft, and it's called Fusion Dance, and it's by our guest, Ben Fuhrman. And if you think you'd like to buy that, you can't just yet. But if you wait until November, what's the date? What's the street date, Ben?
Well, the CD release show is November 30th.
Okay. So it will be ostensibly released on November 30th. We shall look forward to it. At least I shall. I can't speak for anyone else.
Me too. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah?
Yes.
It's good
and
stuff.
So am I.
It's very good stuff. And so you play mandolin in this group, right?
I do.
Okay. So that's kind of a weird thing too. You're kind of weird, Ben. And I say that as a friend.
Thank you.
Okay. So anyway, there's very cool stuff. And you heard in there the things that Ben was just talking about. The frame drum. That one had frame drum and not the tambourine. And cajon. And cajon is an instrument that we will hear again later, in our pick of the week. So I think it's time to move on. Time to move on to our headlines of the week. This is not really a headline, so I shouldn't say that. This is one of these great New Music Box editorials, blog posts, opinion pieces type things from Rob Deemer, who writes about performers who compose, which is an interesting topic for today because we have Ben on, who is a composer who performs. I would say you identify mostly as a composer, right, Ben?
It depends on what venue I'm at.
Okay, so you kind of just go to suit your surroundings. If the people would be hip with composers, then you say you're a composer.
Depends on which frat house party he's attending.
Oh yeah,
right.
It's one of those.
The nice thing is that
there's
no
a word for people like you, Ben.
You're
a turncoat. So Rob is talking about, and I think this to me is a different idea than a composer/performer or a performer/composer, but performers who compose, and he's talking a lot about his experiences teaching where he will encourage people who are not composition majors, who do not consider themselves primarily composers, to write music. And personally, I think there's a lot of value to that. But he does identify a couple of different, I guess, misgivings that people have about this idea. There's, from the perspective of composers, he finds that sometimes composers, particularly young composers, will feel as though the performer that's writing music is kind of taking some of the responsibility away from the composer in this relationship, and that they're kind of in some ways stepping on toes and doing my job, as it were. And then there's also kind of the other side of that coin, is that many performers, when asked about composing, Tim Rosenberg, say that they're not comfortable with that, and that's something that they're happy to leave up to composers. So what do you guys think?
Well, let me clear this up, because you've called me out already, like, several times. So I think
that's essentially why I asked you to be on the show.
I can tell. I've been blindsided.
This is a gotcha question.
Totally. I think that when, just like with writing prose, writing English, you don't really understand words and the way they work until you try to write them down. So you can read all the books you want, but until you try to write something on your own, you don't really completely involve yourself in the process of putting together English sentences. And I think the same thing is true in composition. So I think that composing for performers is a great exercise, but that's not to say that all of those pieces should be played and promoted and performed, by other people. I think it's a good student thing to do. I think it really does help people learn about music and learn about themselves and what they think, where they want to take music with themselves
and what they value in music.
Absolutely. But like I've said, I'm not showing you my compositions for a reason, and it's because they're terrible. And that's not to say that I didn't learn stuff from doing that. I did, but I just don't think that these are pieces for the world. They were pieces for me. I have to believe that you two guys, as composers, have pieces for you that are not pieces you promote or share with other people because they're not great, or there's something you moved on from. Is that true?
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
I think
I'd be really freaked out if people saw my early pieces.
Yeah, so, I think all composers have those pieces that, and especially young composers, that window of time where you like the thing that you wrote is like a month.
That.
And the more music that you write, the larger that window gets. And I think two things happen. One, you become a little bit more forgiving of yourself. And two, you get better at writing music. So, I distinctly remember when I was an undergraduate student that by the time I finished a piece, I had already decided that I couldn't stand the previous piece that I had written, that I had completed, the loop was like less than one composition. By the time I wrote my third piece, I hated my fourth piece. Or other way around. By the time I finished my fourth piece, I hated my third piece. And then by the time I finished my fifth piece, I hated my fourth piece. And all the way through. And then it wasn't until at least graduate school, if not later, that I gave up on that. And like I said, part of it was that I was writing better music, and part of it was that I was a little bit more accepting of some things that maybe I could have done better. I think you learn to find the good things in a piece and not be as distracted and focused on the things that you wish you would have done better. But I am always encouraging of non-composers to write music, because I don't think that because I have composition degrees that I have any special license to write music. And I think, Tim, you would probably agree that just because you have performance degrees doesn't mean that you have any special license over people that don't to play music, right?
No, of course not.
So I mean that's kind of what I'm getting at, and I think that's a lot of what Rob is talking about. And I think the big thing here, and Sam would be proud of me for using this word, is for students and performers to have a little bit more agency over the music that they work with. And even if they're not performing their own music, just writing it, I think, might give them a greater feeling of agency over the music that they play.
Yeah, definitely. And I think a good way to get started with making small decisions about music, about creating music, is by transcribing. And that's something that I've done with students, performance students in the past, is that you don't have to come up with your own idea, but you've got to take this orchestral piece and make it for, two performers, or you've got to take this piece for solo piano and make it for a trio. And all of a sudden you're forced to make certain decisions about voicing and where the music is going, and just figuring out where the heck the melody is sometimes, that many young students don't get to, because they're very wrapped up in their own technique of learning how to play their instrument or do whatever they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I was a performance major for my undergraduate degree, and I really don't think that I fully understood how music works until I started composing. I mean, I had taken all the theory classes and I had analyzed things like Bach fugues, but it wasn't really until I started writing my own that I could understand, this is the subject, this is the answer, this is an episode, this is how I have to play this to bring out the melody. And this is what's important, this is less important. I can kind of go a little bit easier on that in the background.
So the point is, everybody should write music. Go home today and write yourself a little phrase of something. It'll be lovely. And one of another one of these great New Music Box editorials that is kind of related is by Dan Visconti, is called An Appetite for Composing, and it's something I think we as composers have to deal with a lot. I'm not sure exactly what the equivalent would be for performers. This is starting to sound like an episode of Music is Hard. But the appetite for composing, and we hear all the time, I don't know, I know I heard this a lot when I was in school, and I'm sure you guys did too. So people would say things like, if you can be happy doing anything else, go do that other thing. And if you don't, like, if your need to make music doesn't drag you out of bed in the morning, then you should be laying pipe or something. Did you guys hear things like that?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be honest with you. My need to write music is not what gets me out of bed in the morning. I like writing music. I like it a lot. But sometimes it's pretty hard to convince myself to do. And this is what Dan is talking about, that there are a lot of times that you don't feel like doing it. Because frankly, the process of actually putting the dots and lines together sucks. And it's boring and it's tedious. And in the comments to this article, there is somebody quotes Dorothy Parker, who apparently said, "I hate writing, but I love having written," and that so perfectly describes how I feel about writing. And that's Galen Brown who shared that quote on Dan Visconti's article on New Music Box. That's like 4 layers. It's like commentception. So I certainly feel the same way about my own music. That like sometimes it's very exciting. Sometimes I get like really grind at it and I'll just like lose 8 hours. But that I think is rare. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, the writing process is exhausting. I mean, when I'm done with a piece, I usually can't just pick up and start on the next piece immediately. I have to take a week or two off before I can even think about composing again.
Yeah, and Dan talks about that actually a little bit in this piece. Talks about kind of the cycle of harvest and lying fallow, in some ways, kind of applying to writing music. Is there an equivalent to this for playing? Is it just practicing?
Yeah, I mean,
do you like practicing?
No, nobody does.
See, I think there are people who like practicing, and those people are weird.
Yeah, they're unbalanced. I like coffee. I like TV. I like so many other things that I like. I really don't like practicing at all. I like playing.
Yeah.
I like performing. Yeah. I like learning new music and things like that. But once you're into practicing, which is different than learning, it's a grind. It's a problem, not a problem, but it's tough, and it's something that you take a long time going through school, learning how to do more and more efficiently, so that it doesn't take as long for you to get pieces to the point where you like doing them, which is a weird way of describing college, but that's what it is.
Well, and that's what I think a lot of early lessons are on an instrument is learning how to practice. And you get to kind of the higher level things eventually, but at the beginning, you really, I think, are focused on learning how to go home and grind it out in the most efficient way. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, that's what early music lessons should be.
Yeah,
they aren't, because nobody would play instruments anymore. It's not fun. It's really, really terrible. You tell a young student, a fifth grader or whatever, hey, you really need to learn how to play your scales. Like, they're like, yeah, whatever. Okay, I'm gonna play row, row, row your boat because that's fun, and scales aren't fun.
Yeah, my high school band
not
director.
Just the fifth grader too.
Yeah, of course.
That's any student. Period.
My high school band director used to tell parents, if it sounds good when your child is practicing, they're not doing it right. So anyway, that's another really interesting New Music Box article. Thanks to Dan Visconti for writing that. And now we come to our weekly block of orchestra news. You guys are kind of so Ben has never been on the show. Tim hasn't been on the show for a long time. So maybe this would be a good time to get you guys' opinion on the world of orchestras and where they're going. But first, I want to go through some of these headlines really quick. The Indianapolis Symphony that we talked about last week going on strike has signed what they're calling a bridge agreement. So this is kind of postponing their long-term CBA, and the bridge takes them, I believe, till February with management. So they're going to play during this time under this agreement that I assume is kind of just a slight variation on continuing their current contract. The Seattle Symphony musicians have agreed literally to extend their current contract through January 31st of next year. So January 31st, 2013. So again, the Seattle Symphony was also on the verge of missing concerts. They actually, I read in the middle of the week that the Seattle Symphony musicians had voted to approve a strike. So they kind of gave their negotiators that stick to hold over the orchestra management in negotiations, and I assume that had an effect on the extension of their current contract through January 31st. So those are two kind of stopgap things. Hopefully neither of those are a bridge to nowhere, so to speak. We got a lot of politics
Here we go.
in the show today.
It's almost like it's an election year.
Well, that's true. We should do the SoundNotion election special. That's what we should do.
Gee, I wonder who we endorse.
Yeah, let me think about that.
Gary Johnson.
Jill Stein, man, come on.
I don't know who that is.
She's
the Green Party person. I knew that. Sorry. Took me a minute to place that. which probably says something about either me or the Green Party. I'm not sure which. Philadelphia Orchestra, that storied old franchise, announced, or not announced, they debuted their new music director, a 37-year-old French-Canadian fella whose name I am going to butcher as Yannick Nézet-Séguin on Thursday this past week. So Maestro Nézet-Séguin, congratulations. The reviews are in. Everybody seems to really enjoy it. So they're out of bankruptcy. They have a new music director. Hopefully things are going to continue to go well for them. Maybe they can give the Chicago Symphony Orchestra some tips. We are going to have, I should say, sometime in the near future, we're going to have Drew McManus from Adaptistration on to set us straight on all of the misinformation that I'm sure we've been spreading about the orchestra news. Orchestra Nova San Diego, which is formerly the San Diego Chamber Symphony or something like that, now Orchestra Nova, has canceled a bunch of their upcoming concerts. They had been in negotiations for a long time, and it looked like they were going to maybe miss the beginning of the season if things didn't get ironed out pretty quickly. And then this week their music director resigned, and after their music director resigned, they said forget about it, we're going. So they've canceled, I think, through November, all of their concerts. We'll have links to all those stories later. So orchestras, do they have a future in the United States? I'll go to
stop going on into labor strife. Then yes, I think
you So you think there is a if they stop strike? Well, I mean they're always gonna be labor disputes.
One side is right or the other side is wrong. I think that they both have a mutual interest in continuing to be orchestras, because if there's no orchestras, then labor and management get no money.
That's correct.
That's true.
But do you think that there's not some other medium that could use the talents of both of these groups of people? I'm concerned that there are two problems. The classical music as a whole, and orchestral music in particular, is not a growing audience. And the other problem is that all these people still need to, feed their families. So the amount of money that's coming in is the same, but the orchestral musicians and the management still need to make a living on this thing. And I totally understand why the union doesn't want 20% pay cuts, and they don't want to go from, the annual salaried orchestras to the per service orchestras where they get paid for each concert. But at the same time, I'm not sure that it's reasonable to the management would like to not be in this position as well. That's the problem. Nobody wants to be in a position where you have to decide between paying people what they're worth and not having an orchestra. Right?
Yeah.
Ben, what do you think?
Well, I think that the biggest thing that the orchestras could do to get out of this situation is to build up their audience.
How do they do that? They've been working on that for 50 years.
They've been doing that, but they're not really doing anything different. For every LA Philharmonic that will do a new music series, there are hundreds of orchestras around the country that just play the same old war horses and do it in exactly the same way. And we've created this very formalized ritual of going to the orchestra that I really think needs to be torn down in order to help build up a new audience. Okay,
so I think, first of all, there are a lot of orchestras that are trying that and not necessarily playing the war horses. But what they're going to is not what you and I would call new music. They're going to pops.
Right.
And that's what's breaking in the dough. And as much as I would love for new music to be the panacea for orchestras, as much as I would love for the music that you and I and John Luther Adams and everybody else is writing for big ensembles, to be the thing that saves this storied tradition of American orchestras. It's not happening. It's not happening, and it's doubtful that it would ever happen. I mean, the Brooklyn Philharmonic almost went bankrupt trying that.
Yeah.
Right? They almost went away. And we had Alan Pearson on SoundNotion last November, so almost a year ago. And we asked him about new music because he's also the music director of Alarm Will Sound. And we asked him about new music and Brooklyn Philharmonic. And he told us that was one of the things that the management had specifically said to him, was that we want to do more traditional rep because this new stuff isn't paying the bills.
But is the traditional rep paying the bills?
Well, I think it's probably doing a little better job than the weird stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying that we need to abandon all tradition and go exclusively to new music, but I think that there needs to be a better balance in programming, that people are going to come if they see things like video game music concerts. Grand Rapids Symphony has done that a couple of years in a row now, and they sell out very, very quickly. If you do that, and then you maybe program a traditional symphony, maybe something new as well, then you're going to start building the audience a little bit better than if you just play only one specific type of music, whether it's pops or war horses or all new music.
Yeah, I don't know. Tim, what do you think?
I don't know. I'm kind of flipping it around in my head, trying to say, is there really any change in programming that would change how people who have dollars to spend are going to spend it? I kind of think no. I kind of think that people are not interested in going to the concert as an event. People would rather instead of spending those dollars on music, they spend them on something else. And I don't think that having these stopgap and reoccurring labor problems is doing any good, because every time you cancel something, every time you cancel a concert, or if you look at into sports, the NHL is basically imploding, because anytime you take that away from people who have no power and no dog in the fight other than they want their entertainment, they're just going to go spend their entertainment dollars somewhere else. So these orchestras that are striking and making a big deal out of it, I don't know what the solution is. I'm not here saying that somebody's right and somebody's wrong, because I don't know how to fix it. But having an orchestra on strike is only hurting everybody. Mm-hmm. And so I guess if you're going to
only everybody is a funny phrase.
Yeah, I know. if you're, well, okay, look at it this way. Many states, the state that I'm from, New York, don't allow
Syracuse Symphony, rest in peace.
I know. Well, there's another great example. Many states don't allow teachers to strike, and yet they work out contracts, and they get increases in benefits and salary, and life goes on, and the students get taught. Now,
don't pretend that the orchestra is as vital a thing as public schools, though.
I'm not pretending that. I'm making an analogy.
Okay. Analogies I can live with.
That I just don't think that striking and going to this nuclear option of, okay, well, no concerts, then is always the best idea. Things should progress toward striking, and the first progression should be negotiating while playing under protest, and maybe making a big deal that we are performing because we want to play this music, but we don't we don't have a contract and that's bad, and you get the public on your side. And things, there's just other ways to do this, I think, than just constantly striking. And maybe they've tried it and maybe they haven't, but I'm pretty fed up with like labor strife in America, and I think a lot of people are too. And I'm not coming down on one side or the other. I'm just saying that this is getting annoying in every sector.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
It's hard. It can be hard, especially to sympathize with. I mean, Tim, when he says every sector, Tim's a big sports fan, and he had to live through replacement refs in the NFL this season, and he's having to live through no NHL. He's a huge hockey fan, and it's hard to live with people that are this highly paid and highly trained being on strike. I think we're used to auto workers and Teamsters striking, and that's like a relatively normal thing. And it's easy to look at somebody who's making as much as professional hockey players make and say, well, what are you bitching about?
Right.
And
well, you look at
we're in danger of that in some orchestras. Not all orchestras. There are a lot of like journeymen in these orchestras like Orchestra Nova in San Diego. But, a couple of weeks ago we were talking about the Chicago Symphony Orchestra on strike. And I can't imagine people having a lot of sympathy for the Chicago Orchestra. Tim, your favorite writer, Norman Lebrecht, described them in a post about this strike as a luxury orchestra, which is a great...
You look at Chicago. He's not my favorite writer.
That was
you look
that
at
was
Chicago,
sarcasm.
And think about, place yourself in Chicago. Okay, so you've had replacement refs, and it's a big, big football city. You have no Blackhawks. You had your teachers on strike, and you have no orchestra. Like, how are people going to react positively to any of that? They're just going to be really mad at the whole thing.
Yeah, and the Chicago thing was particularly acrimonious because the strike was called like within hours of the first performance. So
people were in the halls.
Yeah, people were like in the hall itself. They were at Orchestra Hall already.
Yeah, they messed it up. You perform under protest. That's if I was running the thing, that's how I'd do it.
Well, and that's essentially what Indianapolis and now I've lost my notes, but this is essentially what Indianapolis and Seattle are doing, is that they're signing these bridge agreements and agreeing to play under them. The danger, though, is that those little bridge agreements become the norm, and it's like the federal budget where you sign a continuing you get a continuing resolution for the next month, and then you don't do jack for the next month, and then it's like the day before the CR ends, and you're like, oh my god, this budget cliff, and then you just sign another continuing resolution, and you do nothing until like 3 days before that one ends, and you're like, oh my god, the budget cliff, we're gonna fall off, and no federal government, we're gonna have everything die, and then you just sign another continuing resolution, and it just goes on like that, and you keep kicking the can down the road. It's a little bit different for politicians because they have to get reelected, and other people that work in orchestras don't. But I think what you're saying is this avoiding strikes, and in a way, that's what Indianapolis and Seattle are trying to do. We talked about that a lot longer than I thought we were going to, and that's okay. We're going to cut this. So I would encourage everyone to subscribe to Bob Shingleton's fantastic blog, On an Overgrown Path, named after the Janacek. Is it in the title of a piece? Anyway,
I have no idea.
On an Overgrown Path, he had an interesting post this week about composer anniversaries and why we celebrate them just because we do, and the effect that they have on people wanting to listen to this music. He's got some great what are these Google Zeitgeist?
Google
Trends graphs. Thank you. Where he looks at the interest in these composers based on Google searches, and he finds that while there is a great spike in interest on Google for each of these composers, this is Mahler, Liszt, and Cage, that after their thing they go right back down, and in some cases they end up lower than they were before because people get a little burned out on these composers, and they're like, well, I don't hear Mahler again for another 20 years. Anyway, we may take this up again next week. He's got a mystery composer. I've predicted, by the way, that this mystery composer's graph. Anybody want to guess who the mystery composer is? So he has said this is a composer who's not celebrating an anniversary, but is experiencing a spike in interest. Anybody?
Philip Glass.
Ben?
I already read your comments, so
I commented with my guest.
Myself.
I predict that this is Thomas Tallis. And I predict that it is Thomas Tallis because Thomas Tallis is mentioned prominently in the smutty romance novel 50 Shades of Grey, and was subsequently featured on an album of classical music compiled by E.L. James that is themed for the 50 Shades of Grey. So that is my prediction. We'll see. I think Bob has committed to another post in the next week or so. I think I'll be right. Let's move on. We don't have Sam to introduce the pick of the week, so I'm just going to try to do my best impression of Sam with his effect thing on his voice. The pick of the week. How was that? Did you all right?
Wonderful.
Okay.
Excellent.
Good. Okay. So our pick of the week, as I said earlier, is by our guest, Ben Fuhrman. This is a piece called Power Cycle, and Power Cycle is for cajon and electronics, and it involves, again, this is like kind of close to that line of the computer improvising, where the computer is listening and listening for the performer, but is also making random choices in the moment. Right, Ben?
That's exactly right.
So the performer has a microphone.
They have a microphone right behind the cajon.
Okay.
Set up to pick up the volume from each tack on the drum.
And for those that may not be familiar with the cajon, because it is not necessarily the most standard orchestral instrument, explain to us what the cajon is.
The cajon is probably my favorite percussion instrument because it also doubles as a chair. It's a box that you sit on and you can hit the front of it. And
Brilliant.
there are snares running down there that give it its distinctive sound.
So and that's a key thing, and you'll hear this in the recording. There are snares like on a snare drum that give it the kind of raspy, rattly sound as opposed to kind of a boomy, open tom kind of sound. So do you have anything you want to say before we to set this up? We're going to listen to a minute or so of it.
Yeah. This is kind of an interesting piece because when I was writing it for Sam Gould, he wanted a piece that didn't sound like anything else. That it wasn't major, it wasn't minor, it wasn't serialist or anything like that. So to do that, what I did was I used the Bolin-Pierce scale, which is based on...
What?
What was that?
The who to what? What's the...
The Bolin-Pierce scale. It's a scale that was discovered by Bolin and Pierce independently, and it is based entirely on odd harmonic partials. So...
Wait, this is a piece for drum, right?
It is.
Okay. Oh, the partials are in the electronics. Duh.
Yep.
Okay.
So instead of having a perfect 12-tone octave, you have a 13-tone octave equivalent that is called the tritive that works out to just slightly under a just intoned 12th.
Okay.
Yeah. So everything is going to sound very familiar in terms of pitch level, but it's also going to sound very out of tune if you were to hear it with a traditional equal-tempered instrument.
With traditional equal-tempered ears.
Yes.
Tim's a big fan of funny tuning systems.
Adjusting my tuning. Adjusting.
Yeah.
Hold on.
All right, so everyone, adjust your ears to set your ears to whatever this thing is called that I've already forgotten the name of it. What's it called again, Ben?
Bolin Pierce.
Okay, so turn your ears to the Bolin Pierce tuning system settings, and we'll take a listen to Power Cycle. Okay, Ben, so I'm not a percussionist or anything, but if you throw those rhythms at me, I would want to punch you. So anyway, that's a very cool piece. I like the electronics a lot. How in the electronics that we just heard, how deterministic is that?
In terms of the pitch content, or in terms of
the electronic sounds in general?
In terms of the sound, it's fairly random at that point. It starts off initially so that only the accented notes in the score are capable of triggering the volume trigger. But then from there, everything that the computer selects and plays back is randomized. It's random sample or samples, plural.
Okay. And we lost Ben.
Oh, no.
So there are random sample or samples. Ben, we lost you at random sample or samples.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Am I back on?
Continue.
Okay. So samples or samples. Then also what the transposition level of those samples is played back at is randomized. And then some of the effects are randomized up until about the bottom of the first page. And then they become a little bit more deterministic for a while. Then they become more random.
And if you're watching the video, I should say, while we were playing that, for lack of an album cover, put up the first page of the score on the screen. Ben has the score to this on his site. So if you're curious about this piece, you should check out the score and check out his notes on it. It's very good stuff. And of course, you should listen to the whole piece because it's a very cool piece. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Ben.
Absolutely. Thank you.
So that was our second Cajon on the show this week. We had Cajon in Wissal, and we had Cajon on Power Cycle. So I would say that's a successful show. Anytime you can get a chair drum hybrid in the show twice, you're winning. So I want to thank you guys both very much for joining me this morning. This is not the usual SoundNotion setup, and I appreciate you guys being willing to work with me on this.
Definitely, thank you.
And Ben, of course, like I said, thanks for sharing your music with us, and we will definitely be on the lookout for some more Ben and Wissal stuff. Ben, I know you've got some performances coming up. Do you want to plug anything you have coming up?
Sure. I've actually got quite a few things coming up.
Well, plug away. This is that spot in the show for plugging.
Okay. Well, the big one that I had coming up performance-wise is unfortunately last Friday. Sarah Plum, the violinist, performed my piece Sirens in Wisconsin at Unruly Music Fest. But coming up, Wissal will be playing at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio on the 26th, which is next Friday.
October 26th.
Yeah. October 27th, Slivovitz, the klezmer band that I play in, will be playing at The Ohio State University. Then November 3rd, Wassaw will also be playing at Mary Baldwin College in Staunton, Virginia. And then on November 30th is our big CD release at Scene Metro Space in East Lansing, Michigan.
Very cool.
Then going into the new year, I have an article that's going to be appearing in the Cooley Law School Review on the subject of copyright and copyright law. That should come out, I believe, in January or February. And then February, we're still working out a date. It's either the 22nd or 23rd. Sam Gould and I will be traveling to the Manchester New Music Mini Festival, where we will be playing Power Cycle.
Wait, which Manchester?
Manchester, Indiana.
Okay. Just checking.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's awesome. That's a lot of stuff. Congratulations on all those shows.
Thanks.
And you have all that stuff on your site, right?
I have most of it on my site. I need to spend some time later today to fix that.
Go to benfurman.com, listen to his music, read his scores, find out about his upcoming shows, and then attend those upcoming shows and listen to the music. Or better yet, download the score and play the music. That's going to do it for this week's SoundNotion. To read about any of the stories that we covered, to read about Ben's stuff, to read about the orchestra news, to read any of the editorials that we talked about, come over to our site, soundnotion.tv/SN. You can also leave us a note there and tell us what you thought about the show. You can connect with us on Facebook and Twitter. You can connect with us as SoundNotion on Twitter, or all of us individually are on Twitter. If you'd like to support the show, go to the site again, soundnotion.tv/SN. There are donation links on the right, but better yet, you can support our show and our network for free, for absolutely nothing. The next time you're buying something on Amazon, there's a search box on our site for Amazon stuff, and if you get to your Amazon item through that search box, we'll get a tiny little commission on that. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it's been very helpful to us. Thank you to all the people that have done it so far, and I want to in particular thank the people that are buying really interesting things. So the people that bought the My Little Pony poster, good work. That's a joke. Nobody bought a My Little Pony poster, but they could have. It doesn't matter what you buy. It could be the stuff that we're talking about on the show, or it could be something entirely different, because Amazon sells literally everything that exists. If it's not sold on Amazon, it really is not for sale. SoundNotion's introduction. Oh, before I get to that, our shows, this show and all our shows, available in the iTunes Store. Go there, subscribe, get them for free, download it to your favorite device. SoundNotion's introduction includes music by Patrick Gullo, who hopefully will be back with us soon, and video by Tyler Lepp. Thank you again for watching. We'll see you back next week.